The gunshot echoed through the valley just as Catherine Riley stumbled through the doors of the small, weathered church, her dress torn and muddy, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grip the wooden pew as she collapsed onto her knees. But Montana was supposed to be her fresh start, a mining town booming with opportunity in this year of 1882, where a widow could run a boarding house and make an honest living without the judgment that had followed her back in Philadelphia. She had arrived 3 months ago with nothing but her late husband's small inheritance and a determination to build something of her own. The boarding house had been doing well enough, miners paying decent rates for clean beds and hot meals, until Marcus Crenshaw decided he wanted the property for himself. He had made offers at first, ones that seemed generous until she realized he was trying to buy the land for half its worth. When she refused, the threats began. Tonight, those threats had turned violent. Catherine pressed her forehead against her clasped hands, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The church was empty at this late hour, lit only by a few candles near the altar that cast long shadows across the rough wooden floor. She had run here on instinct, knowing Crenshaw's men would not dare follow her into a house of God, at least not immediately. Her mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. She could go to the sheriff, but everyone knew Sheriff Dalton was in Crenshaw's pocket. She could leave town, but that would mean abandoning everything she had worked for, admitting defeat once again. "Please," she whispered into the silence, her voice breaking. "I do not know what to do. Show me a way forward. Give me strength or send me help or just let me know I am not alone in this." The words felt inadequate, but they were all she had. Catherine had never been particularly religious, attending services more out of social obligation than genuine faith, but desperation had a way of bringing people to their knees. She thought of her husband Thomas, dead these 2 years from consumption, and how he would have known what to do. He always had a plan, a solution, even when things seemed darkest. But Thomas was gone, and she was here alone in a Montana mining town with men who wanted to take everything from her. She did not hear the door open behind her, did not hear the footsteps approaching until a man's voice, low and gentle, broke through her prayers. "I do not mean to intrude, madam. I can leave if you prefer to be alone." Catherine's head snapped up, her heart hammering. She turned to find a man standing in the aisle, hat in his hands, his expression uncertain in the candlelight. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. Dust covered his clothes, and she could see the wear on his boots, the kind that came from long days in the saddle. A cowboy, then, probably passing through on his way to somewhere else. "I am sorry," she said, quickly wiping at her eyes. "I did not hear you come in." "I am the one who should apologize," he replied. His voice carried a slight drawl, southern perhaps, though softened by years of travel. "I saw the candles and thought the church might still be open. I can come back another time." Catherine started to tell him it was fine, that she was leaving anyway, but something in his eyes stopped her. They were kind eyes, gray or blue in the dim light, and tired in a way that suggested he understood what it meant to carry burdens alone. Before she could second-guess herself, she gestured to the pew beside her. "You are welcome to stay," she said. "I think God has room for more than one lost soul tonight." The man hesitated, then slowly walked forward and sat down, leaving a respectful distance between them. He set his hat on the pew and bowed his head, and Catherine realized he had genuinely come here to pray, not to bother her or make unwanted conversation. She turned back to her own prayers, though she found herself distracted by his presence, wondering what had brought a cowboy to an empty church in Butte on a Thursday night. They sat in silence for several minutes, and Catherine felt some of the tension begin to drain from her shoulders. There was something calming about another person being there, sharing the quiet without demanding anything. Finally, the man cleared his throat softly. "Forgive me for saying so, madam, but you look like you have had a rough evening. I do not mean to pry, but if there is trouble, I might be able to help." Catherine looked at him more carefully. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, probably in his late 20s, only a few years older than her own 24. There was a gun on his hip, worn and well-maintained, but his hands were relaxed, non-threatening. She should have been wary, should have made polite excuses and left, but something about his quiet offer touched a nerve. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked, genuinely curious. "Because I know what it is like to need help and not have anywhere to turn," he said simply. "And because sitting in a church at this hour, looking the way you do, suggests the kind of trouble that is not going to go away on its own." Catherine studied him for a long moment, weighing risks and options. She was out of good choices, and something in her gut said this man could be trusted. Maybe it was foolish, maybe it was the answer to her prayer, or maybe it was both. "There is a man named Marcus Crenshaw who wants my property," she said quietly. "He has been threatening me for weeks, and tonight his men came to my boarding house. They said if I did not sign the deed over by tomorrow, they would burn it down with me inside. I ran, and I ended up here." The cowboy's expression darkened. "Marcus Crenshaw, I know that name. He runs most of the mining operations around here, does he not?" "Yes. He owns half the town, and he wants to own the other half. My boarding house sits on a piece of land he claims is perfect for expanding his operations." "And the sheriff will not help," Catherine laughed bitterly. "The sheriff works for Crenshaw. Everyone knows it." The man was quiet for a moment, his jaw tight, then he extended his hand. "My name is Vincent Lawrence. I am not much, just a cowboy looking for work, but I am good with a gun and I do not take kindly to men who threaten women. If you will have me, I will stand with you against Crenshaw." Catherine stared at his outstretched hand, her mind reeling. This was insane. She did not know this man, had no reason to trust him beyond a feeling and a few kind words. But she was also out of options, and something in his steady gaze made her want to believe. She took his hand. "Catherine Riley, and I accept your help, though I cannot promise it will not get you killed." Vincent's lips curved into a small smile, the first she had seen from him. "Madam, I have been in tight spots before. I am still here, which means I am either lucky or stubborn, probably both." Despite everything, Catherine felt herself smile back. "Then I suppose we are going to need both those qualities. Crenshaw does not make idle threats. Then we better make sure he knows you have someone standing beside you now. Sometimes that is enough to make a man think twice." Vincent stood and offered her his hand again, helping her to her feet. "Do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight? I am guessing your boarding house is not an option." Catherine had not thought that far ahead. "I have a few friends in town, but I would not want to bring trouble to their doors. There is a small hotel on the east side of town, run by a woman named Martha Henderson. She does not have much love for Crenshaw. I was planning to stay there myself tonight. You could take a room there, and I will keep watch to make sure no one bothers you. You were planning to stay there." "You know, but then," Vincent shook his head. "First time in town. I asked around at the livery about places to stay. The stable boy seemed to think Mrs. Henderson runs a decent establishment." Catherine felt a wave of emotion she could not quite name. This man had nothing to gain by helping her, was risking his life for someone he had just met, and yet here he was, calmly making plans to protect her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "Truly." Vincent was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. About 5 years ago, my sister found herself in a similar situation. A man wanted her land, used threats and violence to try to force her hand. I was off working a ranch in Texas, did not even know what was happening until I got a letter saying she had died in a fire. Everyone said it was an accident, but I knew better. I rode home and found out the man who wanted her land had moved right in, claimed there was no proof of anything underhanded. His voice was tight with old pain. I was not there when she needed me. Maybe I cannot change that, but I can make sure I am here for someone else who needs help. Catherine's throat tightened. I am so sorry. What was her name? Virginia. She was 23, stubborn as they come, and the best sister a man could ask for. Vincent cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the emotion. So that is why. Because I could not help her, but I can help you if you will let me. I will let you, Catherine said firmly. And I promise I am stubborn too. Crenshaw is going to learn that some women do not scare easily. That is what I am counting on, Vincent said, and there was approval in his voice that made Catherine stand a little straighter. They left the church together, Vincent insisting on walking slightly ahead, his hand near his gun as they made their way through the dark streets of Butte. The town was still busy despite the late hour. Miners finishing shifts and heading to saloons, women hurrying home from work, the constant sound of machinery from the mines creating a backdrop of industrial noise. Catherine had grown accustomed to it in her 3 months here, but tonight everything felt different, more dangerous. The hotel was exactly where Vincent had said it would be, a modest 2-story building with a painted sign proclaiming it Henderson's Rooms. A lamp burned in the window, and when they entered, a plump woman in her 50s looked up from behind the desk, her sharp eyes taking in Catherine's disheveled appearance and Vincent's protective stance. We need 2 rooms, Vincent said. Something secure if you have it. Martha Henderson was no fool. She had seen enough trouble in her years running a hotel in a mining town to recognize it when it walked through her door. But she also knew Catherine Riley by reputation, knew her as a hard-working widow trying to make an honest living, and that counted for something. I have rooms on the 2nd floor, windows that lock tight. But if you are running from Crenshaw's men, you should know they have been known to make trouble here before. Then we will make sure they think twice about doing it again, Vincent said evenly. Martha studied him for a moment, then nodded. You have the look of a man who means what he says. Rooms are $2 each for the night, includes breakfast in the morning. Vincent paid without haggling, and Martha handed over 2 keys. Rooms 5 and 6, right next to each other. I will keep an eye out tonight, and my husband sleeps with a shotgun by the bed. We do not allow trouble in our establishment. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson, Catherine said, feeling genuinely grateful. I appreciate your kindness. You are a good woman, Mrs. Riley. What Crenshaw is trying to do to you is wrong, and everyone knows it. Most folks are just too scared to say anything. Martha's expression was fierce. But not everyone is scared. You remember that. The rooms were small but clean, with sturdy locks on the doors and windows that overlooked the street. Vincent checked both rooms thoroughly before allowing Catherine to settle into hers. I am going to stay awake tonight, keep watch, he said. If anyone comes, I will hear them. Catherine wanted to protest, to tell him he should rest, but she was too tired and too grateful. Thank you, Vincent, for everything. Get some sleep, Catherine. Tomorrow we are going to go talk to Crenshaw and make it clear that you are not signing anything over to him. He will not listen. He will probably just have us shot. Vincent's expression was grim. Then we will make sure we are prepared for that possibility. But I have found that bullies often back down when they realize their target has teeth. We just need to show him yours. After he left, Catherine locked the door and sank onto the bed, exhaustion crashing over her. The events of the evening felt surreal, like something from a dime novel rather than her actual life. She had walked into a church desperate and alone, and now she had an ally, a cowboy who seemed to have appeared exactly when she needed him most. Was that an answer to prayer or just coincidence? Catherine was not sure, but as she drifted off to sleep, she found herself hoping it was the former. Morning came too quickly, announced by the sounds of but waking up around them. Catherine dressed in her spare clothes, grateful she had grabbed a bag before fleeing her boarding house. When she emerged from her room, she found Vincent already waiting in the hallway, looking more alert than any man should after staying awake all night. "Any trouble?" she asked. "Quiet night. Either Crenshaw's men did not think to look for you here, or they decided to wait until daylight." They went downstairs for breakfast, where Martha served them strong coffee and plates of eggs and bacon. The food was good, and Catherine realized she was starving, having skipped dinner the night before. As they ate, Vincent laid out his plan. "We go to Crenshaw's office this morning, both of us together. You tell him plainly that you are not selling and that any further threats will be met with consequences. I will be there to make sure he understands you have someone willing to back those words up. And if he just laughs at us, then we go to the territorial marshal. I know Butt's sheriff is corrupt, but the federal law is different. Crenshaw might own this town, but he does not own Montana." Catherine had not thought of that. "The nearest marshal is in Helena, is he not? That is nearly 70 miles from here." "It is. But if we can get a telegram to him, explain the situation, he might be willing to investigate. Corruption is one thing, but threats of violence and arson are federal crimes." It was a better plan than Catherine had been able to come up with on her own. She felt a flicker of hope for the first time since this nightmare began. They finished breakfast and made their way to Crenshaw's office, located in one of the nicer buildings in Butt's commercial district. The mining magnate had done well for himself, his wealth evident in the expensive furnishings and the armed guards posted outside. Vincent noticed the guards immediately. "Stay close to me," he murmured, "and let me do the talking if things get tense." The guards tried to stop them, but Catherine drew herself up to her full height and announced that she was there to speak with Mr. Crenshaw regarding his offer for her property. The guards exchanged glances, then one of them went inside. He returned a moment later with instructions to let them pass. Marcus Crenshaw's office was exactly what Catherine expected, all dark wood and expensive carpets, with a massive desk dominating the center. The man himself was in his 50s, well-dressed and well-fed, with cold eyes that assessed them like commodities as they entered. "Mrs. Riley," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "What a pleasant surprise. I had hoped you would reconsider my generous offer, and I see you have brought a friend." "This is Vincent Lawrence," Catherine said, keeping her voice steady. "He is here to ensure this conversation remains civil." Crenshaw's eyes narrowed as he studied Vincent. "A hired gun. Really, Mrs. Riley, I would have thought better of you." "I am not a hired gun," Vincent said calmly. "I am a friend who does not appreciate bullies who threaten women." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Crenshaw leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "I do not know what lies Mrs. Riley has told you, but I have made her a fair offer for property I have legitimate interest in. If she has chosen to interpret business negotiations as threats, that is her own paranoia." "Your men came to my home last night and threatened to burn it down if I did not sign over the deed," Catherine said, her voice shaking with anger rather than fear now. "That is not business negotiation. That is extortion and intimidation. You have proof of these accusations. Witnesses." Crenshaw's smile was predatory. "Because I can assure you, any men who work for me would never engage in such behavior. If someone threatened you, Perhaps you should report it to the sheriff." "We both know the sheriff answers to you," Vincent said. "That is a serious accusation." "Do you have any evidence to support such a claim?" Crenshaw stood, his hands flat on his desk. "I am a respected businessman in this community. I will not sit here and be slandered by some drifting cowboy and a hysterical widow." Vincent's hand moved toward his gun, and immediately the door burst open behind them. 2 more guards entered, weapons drawn. Catherine's heart hammered, but Vincent did not flinch, his eyes locked on Crenshaw. "We are leaving," Vincent said quietly. "But understand this. Mrs. Riley is not selling her property, not now and not ever. Any further threats against her will be met with appropriate force, and this conversation will be reported to the territorial marshal, along with a full account of the corruption in this town." Crenshaw laughed. "The marshal? You think he cares about property disputes in mining towns? Go ahead, send your telegram. By the time anyone bothers to investigate, if they ever do, this will all be settled one way or another." "That sounds like another threat," Catherine said, her voice steady despite her fear. "That sounds like a statement of fact. But is a rough town, Mrs. Riley. Accidents happen. Fires start. People get hurt. It would be such a shame if something happened to you or your new friend here, but that is the reality of life on the frontier." Crenshaw sat back down, dismissing them with a wave of his hand. "Now get out of my office. And Mrs. Riley, I expect your answer by tomorrow. Sell or face the consequences." Vincent placed a hand on Catherine's arm, gently guiding her toward the door. She wanted to scream at Crenshaw, to tell him exactly what she thought of his threats and his arrogance, but she knew it would accomplish nothing. They left the office, the guards watching them with undisguised hostility. Once they were back on the street, Catherine let out a shaky breath. "That went about as well as I expected. Worse, actually. He is not even trying to hide what he is doing. That means he feels completely protected." Vincent's jaw was tight, but he made a mistake. He threatened us in front of witnesses, even if those witnesses work for him. That gives us ammunition. What do we do now? Now we go send that telegram to the marshal, and then we make sure your boarding house is still standing. If Crenshaw is as arrogant as he seems, he might not wait until tomorrow to make his move. They found the telegraph office and sent a detailed message to the territorial marshal in Helena, explaining the situation and requesting immediate assistance. The telegraph operator, a nervous young man who clearly knew who Crenshaw was, promised the message would go out within the hour. From there, they headed to Catherine's boarding house, taking a roundabout route to make sure they were not being followed. The building was still standing, which was a relief, but Catherine could see evidence of the previous night's visit. A window had been broken and someone had painted threatening words across her front door. "I need to clean this up before my boarders return," she said, staring at the ugly red paint. "They already paid for the week. They should not have to deal with this. You have many boarders right now." 4. All miners, decent men who keep to themselves and pay on time. They are out working the day shift, will not be back until evening. Catherine unlocked the door, her hands steadier now that she was back on familiar ground. This was her property, her home, and she would not let Crenshaw take it from her. Vincent helped her clean up the paint and board up the broken window. As they worked, they talked, and Catherine found herself telling him about her life, about Thomas in Philadelphia and the decision to start over in Montana. Vincent, in turn, shared stories of his own wandering life, working ranches from Texas to Wyoming, never staying in one place too long, always moving on when the restlessness got too strong. "Why do you keep moving?" Catherine asked as they scrubbed at the door. Vincent was quiet for a moment. "After Virginia died, I could not stand to stay anywhere that reminded me of her. And then it became a habit. Every time I started to put down roots, I would get the urge to see what was over the next horizon. I have been doing it for 5 years now, and I still have not found what I am looking for. Maybe you are looking in the wrong places. He glanced at her, something shifting in his expression. Maybe I am. They finished the cleanup by early afternoon, and Catherine insisted on making lunch. Her kitchen was her pride, well stocked and organized, and she found comfort in the familiar routine of cooking. Vincent sat at the table and watched her work, and she was surprised to find she did not mind his presence. Usually, she valued her privacy, but something about him felt right, like he belonged in this space. Over sandwiches and coffee, they discussed their options. The telegram had been sent, but they had no idea when or if the marshal would respond. In the meantime, they needed to keep Catherine safe and prevent Crenshaw from making another move. "I could stay here," Vincent offered. "Sleep on the sofa downstairs, keep watch. If Crenshaw's men come back, at least you will not be alone." Catherine wanted to accept immediately, but forced herself to consider the implications. What will my boarders think? A strange man living in the house. Tell them the truth, that you have been threatened and I am here to help protect the property. Any decent man would understand that. He was right, and Catherine knew it. "All right, but you take one of the empty rooms upstairs. I will not have you sleeping on a sofa when I have perfectly good beds available. I do not want to put you out. You are doing me a favor. The least I can do is offer you a comfortable place to sleep." Catherine smiled. "Besides, if you are going to risk your life for me, you should at least get a decent night's rest." Vincent smiled back, and Catherine felt something warm unfurl in her chest. She had not felt this way since Thomas, had not thought she would feel it again. It was too soon to call it attraction, but there was definitely something there, a connection that went beyond gratitude or circumstance. The boarders returned that evening, and Catherine explained the situation as honestly as she could. The men were outraged on her behalf and welcomed Vincent's presence, offering to help keep watch as well. Suddenly, instead of being alone, Catherine had 5 men willing to stand between her and Crenshaw's threats. It was more than she had dared hope for. That night, they took turns keeping watch, Vincent insisting on taking the midnight to dawn shift. Catherine tried to sleep but found herself restless, her mind replaying the confrontation in Crenshaw's office and worrying about what would come next. Finally, around 2 in the morning, she gave up and went downstairs, finding Vincent sitting by the window with a rifle across his lap. "Could not sleep?" he asked softly. "Too much on my mind." Catherine sat down in the chair across from him. "I keep thinking about what he said, about accidents happening. What if he decides to burn this place down anyway, marshal or no marshal? Then we make sure that does not happen. And if he tries, we make sure everyone in this town knows exactly who is responsible." Vincent's eyes were serious in the lamplight. "I will not let him hurt you, Catherine. I give you my word. You barely know me. Why does this matter so much to you? Because it is the right thing to do, and because—" He hesitated, then continued, "Because I have spent 5 years running from the fact that I could not save my sister. Maybe I cannot change the past, but I can change this. I can make sure that this time, the good people win and the bullies lose." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "You are a good man, Vincent Lawrence. I am just a cowboy trying to do the right thing. No, you are more than that." Catherine reached out and placed her hand over his. "You are the answer to a prayer I did not even know how to speak." Vincent's hand turned under hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. They sat like that for a long moment, the silence comfortable and charged at the same time. Catherine knew she should pull away, knew it was too soon and too complicated, but she could not make herself let go. "I am glad I walked into that church last night," Vincent said quietly. So am I. They talked for hours that night, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Catherine learned that Vincent had been a soldier briefly during the tail end of the Civil War, joining up at 17 and spending 6 months in uniform before the fighting ended. He learned that she had married Thomas at 19, more out of practicality than passion, and that while she had cared for him, she had never felt the kind of deep love she had read about in books. "You think that kind of love really exists?" Catherine asked as the sky began to lighten outside. "The kind where you cannot imagine living without the other person." "I think it must," Vincent said. "My parents had it. You could see it in the way they looked at each other, even after 30 years of marriage. When my mother died, my father only lasted 6 months before his heart gave out. The doctors said it was natural causes, but I always thought he died of a broken heart. That is beautiful and terrible at the same time. Love often is, I think. The deeper you care, the more it can hurt, but the alternative is never caring at all, and that seems worse somehow." Catherine agreed. She was beginning to realize that what she felt for Vincent was rapidly becoming something more than gratitude or friendship. It was too fast, too intense, but she could not seem to stop it. Every time he smiled at her, every time he said her name, she felt something shift inside her, like pieces of herself she had thought were broken were suddenly fitting back together in new and unexpected ways. The next day brought news from an unexpected source. One of Catherine's boarders, a miner named John Peterson, came home early with information. He had been drinking with some of Crenshaw's workers at a saloon, and they had been talking freely, apparently not realizing John was one of Mrs. Riley's boarders. "They are planning something for tonight," John said, his expression grim. "I could not get all the details, but I heard them mention fire and making sure the problem gets solved permanently. I think they are going to try to burn you out, Mrs. Riley." Vincent immediately began making preparations. They needed to evacuate the boarding house, but make it look like it was still occupied. If Crenshaw's men came and found the place empty, they might just burn it down anyway. But if they thought people were inside, they might hesitate long enough for Vincent to catch them in the act. "This is too dangerous," Catherine protested. "If they are really planning to set a fire, you could get killed. Which is why I am going to have backup. John and the other boarders have agreed to help. We will set up positions around the property, and when Crenshaw's men show up, we will be ready." Vincent's expression was determined. "But you need to be somewhere else, somewhere safe. This is my property, I should be here to defend it, and you will be in the best way possible, by being alive and able to testify about what happened." Vincent took her hands. "Please, Catherine. I need to know you are safe. I cannot focus on stopping them if I am worried about protecting you at the same time." Catherine wanted to argue, but she could see the logic in his words. "Where would I go? Back to Martha Henderson's hotel. She already knows the situation, and she has made it clear she is on your side. Stay there tonight, and in the morning this will all be over one way or another." Reluctantly, Catherine agreed. She packed a bag and let Vincent walk her to the hotel, where Martha welcomed her with open arms and promises that no one would bother her there. Before Vincent left, Catherine caught his arm. "Be careful," she said, her voice tight with worry. "Please, Vincent, I just found you. I do not want to lose you." Vincent's expression softened. He reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch sending shivers down her spine. "I will be careful, and when this is over, we are going to have a long conversation about what comes next, for both of us." "I would like that." He leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, a gesture so tender it made Catherine's breath catch. Then he was gone, heading back into the night to set his trap for Crenshaw's men. Catherine spent the evening pacing her hotel room, unable to sit still. unable to think about anything except what might be happening at her boarding house. Martha brought her dinner, but she could barely eat. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness, each minute feeling like an eternity. Around midnight, she heard shouting in the distance, then what sounded like gunshots. Catherine ran to the window, her heart in her throat, but she could not see anything from this angle. Martha appeared at her door, her expression worried. "Something is happening out there." "My husband went to look, said there is a commotion near your boarding house." Catherine could not stand it anymore. She grabbed her shawl and headed for the door, ignoring Martha's protests. She had to know if Vincent was all right, had to see for herself what was happening. She ran through the streets of Butte, her skirts hiked up, her lungs burning, fear driving her forward. When she reached her boarding house, she found a crowd gathered in the street. Several men were being held at gunpoint by Vincent and the boarders, while others were trying to put out a small fire that had been started against the side of the building. The sheriff was there, looking furious, and Catherine realized with a start that he was arguing with someone. The territorial marshal. He must have received their telegram and ridden through the night to get here. Catherine felt weak with relief. Vincent saw her and immediately came over, his face smudged with soot but otherwise unharmed. "Are you all right?" They both said at the same time, then laughed despite the tension. "I am fine," Vincent assured her. "We caught them red-handed, 3 of Crenshaw's men with oil and torches. The marshal arrived just as they were trying to light the fire. It was perfect timing." The marshal, a stern man named Robert Coleman, took statements from everyone involved. The evidence was overwhelming. Not only had Crenshaw's men been caught attempting arson, but one of them, faced with serious federal charges, broke down and admitted that Crenshaw had ordered the attack. He even revealed that this was not the first time Crenshaw had used such tactics to acquire property. By dawn, Crenshaw himself had been arrested and taken into custody. The news spread through Butte like wildfire, and Catherine could hardly believe it was over. She stood in front of her boarding house, watching as workers repaired the minor fire damage, Vincent beside her. "I cannot believe it actually worked," she said, feeling dazed. "Justice does not always win, but sometimes it does. Especially when good people are willing to stand up and fight for it." Vincent looked tired but satisfied. "Crenshaw is going to prison for a long time. The marshal said he has been looking for evidence of corruption in Butte for months, and this gave him everything he needed." "What about the sheriff? Being investigated. Probably going to lose his job at minimum, possibly face charges of his own." Vincent turned to face her fully. "It is over, Catherine. Your property is safe and you can go back to your life." Catherine should have felt relieved, should have been celebrating, but instead she felt a strange sense of loss. Because Vincent going back to his wandering life meant leaving her behind, and she was not ready for that. She was not ready for this to end. "What about you?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "I suppose you will be moving on now, looking for the next horizon." Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether I have a reason to stay." Catherine's heart began to pound. "And do you?" "Have a reason to stay? I think I might." Vincent reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and sure. "These past few days with you have been the first time in 5 years that I have not wanted to run. The first time I have felt like maybe I found what I have been looking for." "And what is that?" Catherine whispered. "A home, a purpose, someone worth staying for." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "I know it is fast, and I know we have only known each other a few days, but Catherine, I think I am falling in love with you." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. "I think I am falling in love with you too, and it terrifies me because I have never felt anything this strong before, not even with Thomas." Does it terrify you enough to want me to leave? No. It terrifies me enough to want you to stay forever. Vincent smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and lighter, like a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Then I will stay. If you will have me, I will stay in Butt and build a life here. With you. Catherine threw her arms around him, and Vincent caught her, holding her tight against his chest. She could feel his heart beating, steady and strong, and she knew with absolute certainty that this was right. This man who had walked into a church and sat beside her in her darkest moment had become the answer to every prayer she had not known how to speak. "I will have you," she said against his shirt, "for as long as you will stay. Then you have me for the rest of my life." They stood there in the morning light, holding each other while Butt woke up around them, and Catherine felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. Real, genuine hope for the future. The weeks that followed were busy ones. Crenshaw's trial became the talk of Montana territory, with newspapers sending reporters to cover the case. Catherine and Vincent both testified, their accounts helping to seal Crenshaw's fate. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison for arson, extortion, intimidation, and a host of other charges that came to light during the investigation. The corrupt sheriff was removed from office and replaced with a man Marshal Coleman personally recommended, someone with a reputation for honesty and integrity. Vincent found work at a nearby ranch, the owner impressed by his skills and reputation. He moved into Catherine's boarding house officially, taking one of the rooms and paying rent like any other boarder, though everyone knew there was more between them. It was a small town and people talked, but Catherine found she did not care. She was too happy to worry about gossip. Their courtship was different from anything Catherine had experienced with Thomas. Where her first marriage had been practical and comfortable, this was passionate and intense. Vincent made her laugh, challenged her opinions, supported her dreams. He helped her expand the boarding house, using his carpentry skills to add 2 more rooms. Catherine taught him to cook, and they spent evenings in the kitchen together, flour on their faces and joy in their hearts. 6 months after that night in the church, Vincent proposed. He did it simply, without fanfare, just the 2 of them sitting on the porch of the boarding house watching the sunset over the mountains. "Marry me, Catherine," he said, taking her hand. "I know I am just a cowboy without much to offer except a strong back and a loyal heart, but I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," Catherine said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in the same church where they had met, with Martha Henderson and the boarders and half of Butt in attendance. Marshal Coleman even made the trip from Helena to attend, pleased to see a good ending to the case that had helped him clean up corruption in the territory. Catherine wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, and Vincent wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous as he waited for her at the altar. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed her with such tenderness that Catherine felt tears stream down her face. This was what love was supposed to feel like. This connection, this certainty, this absolute conviction that she had found her other half. They honeymooned at a cabin in the mountains, borrowed from Vincent's employer at the ranch. For a week, they existed in their own perfect world, learning each other's bodies and hearts, talking about their dreams for the future. Vincent wanted to eventually buy his own ranch, build something that would last. Catherine wanted to keep running the boarding house, but maybe expand it into a proper hotel someday. They made plans and promises, building a future together one conversation at a time. When they returned to Butt, they settled into married life with surprising ease. Vincent continued working at the ranch, and Catherine ran the boarding house, which was more successful than ever now that the Crenshaw threat was gone. They saved their money carefully, planning for the ranch Vincent dreamed of. A year after their wedding, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Vincent over dinner, watching his face transform from confusion to understanding to pure joy in the space of a heartbeat. "A baby," he said, his voice awed. "We are going to have a baby, we are. In about 6 months, if the doctor is right." Vincent came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. "I am going to be a father. We are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" Catherine asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. Happy does not even begin to cover it. "I love you so much, Catherine. You and this baby, you are everything I did not know I needed." Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1884. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Vincent, pacing outside the room, thought he might lose his mind with worry. But finally, Catherine's cries were replaced by a baby's wail, and the midwife emerged with a smile. "You have a healthy son, Mr. Lawrence, and your wife is tired but doing well." Vincent nearly collapsed with relief. He went into the room and found Catherine propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up when he entered, her smile brighter than the sun. "Meet your son," she said softly. Vincent approached carefully and looked down at the baby in her arms. He was perfect, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn gray like his father's. Vincent reached out with one finger and touched his son's tiny hand, feeling emotions he could not even name welling up inside him. "He is beautiful," Vincent whispered. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Catherine knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas," she said. "After my first husband who gave me the courage to start over, and his middle name should be Vincent after the man who gave me a reason to hope again." "Thomas Vincent Lawrence," Vincent said, testing the name. "I like it. I like it very much." He leaned down and kissed Catherine gently, then placed a soft kiss on his son's forehead. "Welcome to the world, Thomas. Your mother and I are going to do our best to give you a good life." The years that followed were full and happy. Vincent and Catherine saved enough to buy a small ranch just outside of Butte, a modest spread with good grazing land and a creek running through it. They kept the boarding house as well, hiring a manager to run it so Catherine could focus on raising Thomas while still maintaining her investment. 2 years after Thomas was born, they had a daughter, a tiny girl with Catherine's dark hair and Vincent's serious eyes. They named her Virginia, after Vincent's sister, and Catherine could see the healing in her husband's face every time he held their daughter. The ghosts that had haunted him for so long finally seemed to be at rest. Life was not always easy. The ranch had hard years, and there were times when money was tight and the work seemed endless. But through it all, Vincent and Catherine faced every challenge together, their love growing deeper with each passing season. On their 10th anniversary, they sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching Thomas, now 9, teaching 6-year-old Virginia how to ride a horse. A third child, a son named Samuel, was asleep inside, barely a year old. Catherine leaned against Vincent's shoulder, feeling content and grateful. "Do you ever think about that night in the church?" she asked. "About how different things could have turned out?" "I think about it all the time," Vincent admitted. "I think about how I almost did not stop that night, how I considered just riding through Butte and finding somewhere else to sleep. If I had made that choice, we never would have met. But you did stop. You walked into that church exactly when I needed you most. Or maybe you prayed me there. Maybe God heard a woman asking for help and sent a cowboy who needed saving just as much as she did." Vincent kissed the top of her head. "Either way, I am grateful every single day that I sat down beside you." Catherine turned and looked up at her husband, seeing the love in his eyes, the life they had built together written in every line of his face. "You told me once that you had been looking for something for 5 years and had not found it. Did you ever find what you were looking for?" Vincent smiled. "I found everything I was looking for and more. A home, a family, a purpose, a love that makes every day worth living. I found you, Catherine, and that is worth more than anything I could have imagined. I love you, Vincent Lawrence. I love you too, Catherine Lawrence, for the rest of my life and beyond." They sat together in the fading light, watching their children play, surrounded by the life they had built from prayer and chance, and the courage to believe in second chances. The Wild West was slowly being tamed, the frontier giving way to civilization, but here on their ranch with their family around them, Vincent and Catherine had found something wild and wonderful and enduring. The love they shared was the kind that survived hardship and celebrated joy, that grew stronger with time rather than fading. It was the kind of love that began with a desperate prayer in an empty church, and a cowboy brave enough to sit beside a stranger and become her answer. Years continued to pass, and the Lawrence family flourished. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, often talking about the day he would run it himself. Virginia proved to have her mother's business sense and her father's determination, helping Catherine manage the boarding house accounts by the time she was 12. Samuel was quieter than his siblings, but had a gift with horses that amazed everyone who saw him work. Vincent and Catherine added to their family once more, a daughter named Grace who came along when Catherine was 34 and Vincent 39. She was a surprise, but a welcome one, arriving in the spring of 1895 and bringing fresh joy into their already full lives. The ranch prospered over the years, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful in the region. Vincent's reputation as an honest, hard-working rancher spread, and he became a respected member of the community. Catherine's boarding house became a hotel, just as she had dreamed, a 3-story building that was known throughout Montana for its cleanliness, good food, and fair prices. But their greatest success was not measured in acres or buildings. It was measured in the family they had raised, the love that continued to bind them together, and the legacy of courage and faith they passed on to their children. When Vincent turned 50, Catherine threw him a party that brought together everyone whose lives they had touched over the years. Martha Henderson was there, older now but still sharp as a tack. Marshall Coleman, retired but still commanding respect, made the trip from Helena. The boarders who had stood with them that dangerous night so many years ago came, bringing their own families. Even the ranch hands and hotel staff came, testimony to the Lawrences' reputation as fair and generous employers. During the party, Thomas, now 21 and managing much of the ranch's daily operations, stood up to make a toast. "To my father," he said, raising his glass. "A man who taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what is right despite it. And to my mother, who showed me that strength comes in many forms. You two built something remarkable, not just in land and businesses, but in the family you raised and the lives you touched. Thank you for showing us what real love looks like." Catherine felt tears streaming down her face as everyone raised their glasses. Vincent's hand found hers under the table, squeezing tight, and when she looked at him, she saw his eyes were wet too. "We did all right, did we not?" he whispered to her. "We did better than all right," she whispered back. "We did wonderfully." That night, after the guests had gone and the children were in bed, Vincent and Catherine walked out to their favorite spot on the ranch, a hill that overlooked the valley. The stars were brilliant overhead, the same stars that had shone down on them that first night in Butte when everything seemed impossible. "You remember what you prayed for that night in the church?" Vincent asked, his arm around her shoulders. Catherine thought back, trying to recall her exact words through the haze of years. "I asked for strength or help, or just to know I was not alone. I was so desperate I did not even know what I was asking for." "And God sent you a cowboy who did not know what he was looking for until he found you," Vincent said with a smile. "I think we both got more than we prayed for. Much more." Catherine leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, still strong despite the years. "I got a partner, a best friend, a love that never faded. I got children who make me proud every single day. I got a life I could never have imagined. So did I. I thought I would spend my whole life running, trying to outrun grief and guilt. But you gave me a reason to stay, to build, to believe in something bigger than my own pain." They stood together in silence, comfortable and complete. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of earth and growing things. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, its voice lonely and wild. But here, in this moment, Vincent and Catherine felt nothing but peace. As they aged, they began to slow down, letting their children take on more responsibility. Thomas married a smart, kind woman named Elizabeth and gave them their first grandchild, a boy they named Vincent. Virginia shocked everyone by becoming a lawyer, one of the first women in Montana to do so, using her sharp mind to fight for justice. Samuel started a horse breeding program that became famous throughout the region. Grace, still young, showed promise as a teacher. Vincent and Catherine sold the hotel when Vincent was 58, deciding it was time to focus entirely on the ranch and their family. They were financially secure, blessed beyond what either of them had ever expected. But the true measure of their wealth was not in money but in the moments they shared. They still took walks every evening, still held hands like young lovers, still found ways to make each other laugh. Their physical passion had mellowed over the years into something deeper, an intimacy that went beyond bodies to touch souls. They knew each other completely, the good and the bad, and loved each other anyway. On their 25th anniversary, Vincent surprised Catherine with a trip back to the church where they had met. It had been renovated over the years, made larger and more modern, but the bones of the old building were still there. They sat in the same pew where Vincent had first sat beside her, and Catherine felt the weight of years and gratitude. "Thank you for stopping that night," she said softly. "Thank you for being brave enough to ask if I needed help." "Thank you for letting me," Vincent replied. "Thank you for trusting a stranger and giving me a chance to be the man I needed to be." They prayed together then, not prayers of desperation but prayers of thanksgiving. For the years they had shared, for the family they had built, for the love that had sustained them through everything. When they finished, Vincent helped Catherine to her feet, and they walked out of the church hand in hand, just as they had done so many times before. More years passed, bringing new grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. Vincent's hair turned completely white, and his body began to show the wear of decades of hard work. Catherine developed arthritis that made her hands ache, but she still found joy in cooking for her ever-expanding family. They were growing old together, exactly as they had promised. When Vincent was 72, he had a heart attack while working with the horses. Samuel found him and got him inside, where Catherine held him while they waited for the doctor. Vincent's face was gray, his breathing labored, and Catherine felt fear grip her heart. "Do not you leave me, Vincent Lawrence," she said fiercely, holding his hand. "We have more years ahead of us. You promised me the rest of your life." "And I have given it to you," Vincent said weakly. "Every single day, Catherine, no regrets." The doctor arrived and managed to stabilize Vincent, but the message was clear. His heart was weak, and he needed to take things easier. Vincent, stubborn as ever, resisted at first, but Catherine put her foot down. "You listen to me," she told him one night as they lay in bed. "I am not ready to lose you. Our great-grandson was just born, and Grace is getting married next spring, and I need you here beside me for all of it. So you will rest, and you will let Thomas handle the heavy work, and you will take care of yourself. Do you understand?" Vincent smiled at her fierce expression. "Yes, madam, I understand. I will stay as long as I can, I promise." He kept that promise. Vincent lived another 8 years, years filled with family gatherings and quiet moments. He walked Grace down the aisle at her wedding, held more great-grandchildren, and saw Thomas's eldest son take over primary management of the ranch. His health was fragile, but his spirit remained strong, sustained by Catherine's presence and the life they had built. On a spring morning in 1918, Vincent woke to find the sun streaming through the window of the bedroom they had shared for decades. Catherine was already awake, sitting in the chair by the window with her Bible, her morning ritual. "Good morning," he said, his voice rougher than it used to be but still warm. Catherine looked up and smiled. "Good morning, my love. How do you feel?" "Like a blessed man." Vincent sat up slowly, his movements careful. "Come here." Catherine came to the bed and sat beside him, and Vincent took her hands. They were both old now, their hands marked by age spots and wrinkles, but to him, she was still the beautiful woman who had been praying alone in a church all those years ago. "I love you, Vincent Lawrence. I have loved you from the moment I sat beside you in that church, and I will love you beyond the end of my days." "I love you too," Catherine said, her eyes bright with tears. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Vincent, the very best thing." They sat together in the morning light, holding each other, surrounded by the evidence of their life together. Photographs on the walls showed their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Awards and certificates testified to their success and community contributions. But more than any of that, their love filled the room, tangible and real and undiminished by time. Vincent died peacefully 2 days later, sitting in his favorite chair on the porch, watching the sunset over the mountains he had loved. Catherine was beside him, holding his hand, and his last words were her name. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Vincent had touched. He was remembered as a fair boss, a loving father and grandfather, a devoted husband, and a man of integrity and courage. Catherine stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and felt both profound grief and profound gratitude. She lived another 5 years without him, years that were harder than she expected. She had known she would miss Vincent, but she had not anticipated the depth of the loneliness, the way every day felt incomplete without him. But she was sustained by her family and her faith, and by the certainty that they would be together again. Catherine Riley Lawrence died at the age of 85, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Vincent had created. Her last conscious thought was of a cowboy walking into a church and sitting beside her, and her last words were a prayer of thanksgiving for the gift she had been given. She was buried beside Vincent under the Montana sky they had both loved. Their headstone was simple, bearing their names and dates and a single line that their children had chosen together. Prayer brought them together. Love kept them there. Years after both of them were gone, their great-great-grandchildren would play on the ranch that Vincent built and Catherine sustained. They would hear stories of the brave cowboy and the determined widow who met in a church and built an empire of love. The details would fade with time, as such things do, but the essence remained. 2 people, desperate and lost in their own ways, who found each other at exactly the right moment. A prayer spoken in darkness that was answered by a man brave enough to sit beside a stranger. A love that grew from crisis into something enduring and beautiful. The boarding house was long gone, replaced by modern buildings. The church had been torn down and rebuilt, but itself had changed almost beyond recognition, evolving from a rough mining town into something more civilized. But the legacy of Catherine and Vincent lived on in the descendants who carried their blood, their values, and their story. On quiet evenings, when the Montana wind whispered through the grass on that hillside where they were buried, it was easy to imagine them still there. Still holding hands, still sharing their evening walks, still bound by a love that had conquered fear and time and death itself. Because some loves are too strong to be constrained by mortal limitations. Some loves are written in the stars and sealed by prayers, and confirmed by the simple act of one person choosing to sit beside another in an empty church. The story of Vincent and Catherine was one of those loves. A love that began with answered prayer and ended only to continue in eternity. A love that proved that sometimes the most desperate moments lead to the most beautiful beginnings. A love that showed generations of their descendants what it meant to truly commit, to truly honor, and to truly cherish another person. They had been given the gift of each other, and they had spent every day of their lives honoring that gift. In a wild west full of violence and uncertainty, they had carved out a space for tenderness and devotion. In a world that often seemed cruel and random, they had proven that faith and courage could lead to miracles. And it all started with a woman praying alone in an empty church, and a cowboy who sat beside her and became the answer to everything she needed. Their story was over, but its impact rippled forward through time, touching lives in ways they never could have imagined. Children grew up hearing about great-great-grandma Catherine and great-great-grandpa Vincent, learning that love was worth fighting for, that strangers could become soulmates, and that prayers were heard and answered, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the family history. But the foundation remained the same, built on the love and dedication of two people who had refused to give up when things seemed impossible. In the end, theirs was a simple story made profound by the depth of feeling behind it. A cowboy and a widow, meeting by chance or by providence, depending on your perspective. Two broken people who found wholeness in each other. Two lonely souls who discovered that together they were complete. And somewhere, in whatever lies beyond this life, they were together still, their love transcending death as it had transcended every other obstacle. Still holding hands, still sharing quiet conversations, still grateful for that night in an empty church when everything changed. That was their legacy. Not land or money or buildings, but love. Pure, enduring, transformative love that proved that even in the hardest times, in the wildest places, there was room for tenderness and hope. She had been praying alone in an empty church, desperate and afraid and out of options. He had been a drifting cowboy, running from grief and searching for meaning. Together, they had found everything they needed and more. Together, they had become the answer to each other's prayers, and in doing so had created something beautiful that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. Their story was complete, their ending as happy as any love story could hope for. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it. What more could anyone ask?